Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Leading Innovation at Work, the New Normal Special Edition. I'm really excited about today's guest, Mike Petrusky, coming to us from Washington, D.C. Hi Mike, how you doing today?
Lorri, it is my honor and privilege to be on your show. This is amazing. Thank you for having me.
The tables are turned, right?
Yes, I
Isn't that
don't know what
great?
to do. I've got my list of questions here, and I'm going to have to hold back, resist the urge to ask you all the questions. But I am hoping we can just have a two-way dialogue, a conversation, let our listeners kind of eavesdrop as you and I share the real story of what it's like to operate in the world of podcasting and videos. You know, we're just people, right? People are people, as Depeche Mode said in the 80s.
That's right. Oh, and I love the music references, and there may be singing a bit later on. For those of you who don't know, Mike is one of our esteemed voices in our industry. He's a workplace innovator. He has a well-known podcast, which is why he's teasing me a little bit. And I'm a student at his leadership in this area, and he's just done a great job for our industry and a great service for our industry in the Workplace Innovators podcast.
Well,
He's also a speaker, an FM innovator. He works for iOffice. He wears many hats. But Mike, I thank you so much for the great service you do for our industry and your voice and how you are a platform for great speakers and thought leaders in your podcast.
Well, that is so kind of you to say. And that's the key too, right, Lorri? It's people like you coming on my show that allows me to share with my audience all of the great insight and inspiration, which is another piece of what I like to do, because we are going through some challenging times. It's always been difficult in the fast moving world of workplace and facility management. And I've always said we need to be on the move and comfortable being uncomfortable. And who knew these past 6 months, what it would be like living in a pandemic and putting accelerant on all of those industry trends and challenges that we talk about. So I'm just very fortunate and blessed and thankful to have people like you on my show, other industry leaders. We have a lot of the same friends. And really, when it's a conversation like this, where we can just kind of be authentic and understand and share with each other the fact that we don't have all the answers, that's what I enjoy most.
I agree. And I think just by discussing it and just getting observations from thought leaders in our industry, we start to form our thoughts on how we're going to manage things going forward. And you're right, things changed overnight. We didn't really have a choice. And we've been living in this remote experiment for 6 months. Some of it has been going well and some of it hasn't. And I think it's important to talk about both of those things as to what we think is going to leave an indelible mark on our profession and our industry going forward, and what lessons we've learned as well, and things we've been struggling with that maybe we need to give more attention to. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on that topic today, Mike.
And I'm happy to share them. I have a lot of thoughts, Lorri. In fact, you know, the trend and the interesting kind of flow of the conversation over these past 6 months is something that's struck me as interesting. You know, you've been on my live stream, you've been on my podcast, and in fact, you've been on twice. And now this is the third time we're talking in these past 6 months. And the contrast from what we talked about the first time versus your second appearance versus now, I have all these new ideas and thoughts I want to run by you, because things are changing so fast. In fact, in the beginning, it was this hunger for information. What do? We have this new virus. It's all very novel, and we're all kind of just in crisis mode. Let's stay safe, get everybody out of our offices, set up for remote work, and do what we can to continue functioning. As time went on, people like me and you were hungry for more information, more data. What do we do? How can we make some decisions about more of a longer term perspective? And as that was going on, we started realizing that this is going to be a long-term situation. It's not going to be behind us. The pandemic isn't going to be over anytime soon. And then we started worrying about, well, what are the implications of remote work for those that haven't done it before and will be doing it for a long time to come? And then what about the eventual return to office and reentry and the fear and the anxiety around that? And there's so much we could talk about.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts as to what you think is going to change. I mean, I think some things have accelerated. I know was sort of dabbling in Teams and Zoom prior to this, and I think I'm my expertise has definitely gone way up. But I think, and I don't think I could ever go back. This is just such a rich way to engage with people. But yeah, I think there's a few indelible marks that this whole experiment will leave on us. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as to what you think is going to stick around. What kind of changes do you think this has set in motion for the future of the way we will work going forward?
Well, I'll answer that by starting by sharing my personal experience because, as you know, I'm similar to you. I traveled for a living and I spoke at conferences and visited events for a living. And that all ended on March, I believe the date was 6th for me. The last plane ride for me was on March 6th when I came back from an IFMA event in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I realized very quickly that all my scheduled events were being canceled and we had to rethink the way we interact as a community. So I started a live stream. Others started doing webinars. All this virtual content started happening. All of our organizations went to Teams or Zoom or GoToMeeting. All these different technologies allow us to have this face-to-face interaction, which again is great. It's a positive. It's a good thing. It was something, it's ironic, Lori, that in the beginning of 2020, I had made a commitment to use the camera more. I have always done webinars and I've always done a lot of audio only podcasts. And I've always felt that safety and security of hiding behind that PowerPoint presentation and not having to put my face out there. But I said, you know, in 2020, I'm going to put my face on screen and be a part of the authentic world of, you know, video recording and video production. And look what happened. All of a sudden, the entire world does it now. So it's no big deal. We're all out there. But the downside of that, and I've experienced this, and I imagine our listeners have too, is that I hit a wall pretty quickly. I after about a month and a half, 2 months of just constant digital experience, virtual events, going from dawn till dusk with meeting after meeting. In fact, many meetings that I never had to worry about being a part of, all of a sudden, because I wasn't on the road, my colleagues were inviting me to things that I didn't normally participate in. And I don't know if it was really the wise move because I don't know if I needed to be there, but I was there and it was draining me and draining me. And the thing that nobody realizes is that there is a higher cognitive load on us when we are in front of a camera as opposed to being in front of another person. I think the funny part of it is it's like being at a boardroom table, someone told me, and instead of sitting around that table and just looking at all the other faces, you're sitting around that table and looking at other faces on camera, at the same time staring at yourself. It's like you have a mirror in your face and you have to constantly be looking at yourself while talking to all these other people. And it adds this level of unnatural human experience that I don't think any of us were prepared for. Did you go through that? And did it kind of affect you cognitively and wear you down until you learned to adjust?
Yeah, there was definitely some, we nicknamed it Zoom fatigue at the beginning, where you're just back
That's
to
right.
back. And, you know, you want to interact with people because you want to know what's going on. So it did significantly increase the number of meetings because we didn't have the benefit of those casual conversations. So we needed to switch to something that was much more structured. And it just ended up with like 12 to 14 hours in a day of Zoom meetings. And that was challenging. And so one of the things that I started to adopt to mitigate that was stronger focus on wellness breaks. And I
Yes.
confess I wasn't always very good at that in the past. And I'm being much more intentional about that now. I just have to. I go crazy if I didn't. So, you
Same
know,
here.
there's some things that are forcing us to evolve, you know, just out of necessity.
And to answer your question, this is one of those things that I think is in our future for the long term. This virtual experience and learning and adapting to it has been something that we're all going through. And I feel I've gotten to a much better place. I have been more conscientious about taking those well-being breaks, listening to the birds sing, go outside, take a walk, feel the sunshine on my face. And it's necessary to keep my sanity because it really was driving me to an unhealthy place. But that being said, I try to now think of ways to do it more creatively and not just the traditional everybody get on a Zoom call or everybody get to a webinar and have someone talk at you. How do we make it interactive? How do we bring the human side to this experience? And how do we continue to keep it engaging and valuable while also freeing people up to be themselves? And I think there's still that challenge ahead of us. And I think in the long run, that's the area I think I can be most helpful in because I want to maybe model how this can be done more authentically, because I don't know about you, but when I get on a call and I meet my colleagues, and many of them, it's funny, I've met for the first time over video and I've never seen them face to face, and I may not for a long time to come, but I've gotten to know them. And the ones I've gotten to know best are like my co-host, Madison, who I'm with every week, and we prepare for a live stream, and then we get on this live stream together. And we've been forced, because of that constant interaction and ideation and all the creative things that go into preparing a live stream broadcast, it's forced us to kind of grow our relationship, get to know each other, and find that comfort level, which is then, you've been kind enough to say, has been shown on screen during the actual broadcast. But if we could mimic that somehow with just our regular team and our regular colleagues, and in our regular day-to-day, week-to-week organizational meetings, if there's some way to bring that kind of energy and deliberate ideation and creativity to the table, I'm all for that. And I think there are things happening, and I've had some conversations with people who are experts in design thinking and other creative ways to do it virtually. And I'm excited and optimistic that we can get it done. So that's the first thing I think is going to change, but it still needs to be fine-tuned.
How do you allow for those casual interactions where you build rapport and that sort of that social equity of trust and high performing culture with some employees that you haven't even met before, but just to maintain that on an ongoing basis? Do you structure like cocktail hour and everybody has like a remote drink together at the end of the day? Or do you allow for 10 minutes during the meeting for that banter? How do you actually structure that, Mike? Or how do you handle that? Because it sounds like you've been effective at it. It's certainly with Maddie you have.
Well, that's the only thing I would say. With Maddie, yes. With the other members of my team, not so much. And I'm the first to admit that's a failing or a weakness or a area for improvement. I don't want to call it a failing forward, as you know that we all resist that term of failure. But really, to be honest, I don't do it well with others. And I think there's a default setting in all of us as humans, certainly in myself, where I don't want to bother people. I know everybody's as busy as I am. Everybody's zoomed out. Everybody has enough scheduled meetings. I don't want to schedule another happy hour or some forced interaction. But I think we need to. I think we need to rethink that. The mindset has to be, certainly tools like Slack are good, and we use that for quick conversations. Texts are good if it's a level above Slack urgency. But how about that human side? And I think we do take some time to ask about, how's it going? But I still think we're all in this place of, I don't want to give you my full story because I know you don't have time for that. So I'm going to say everything's fine, even if it might not be. So that's probably the second area that I think is going to have to change long-term, and this pandemic is forcing us to consider. And I don't even think we've scratched the surface of really understanding where people are personally, well-being wise, mental health wise, productivity wise. I really think we are giving a false image or a false portrayal of the real story. And if you want to dig deeper into that, I'm happy to, because I have some thoughts on it. But do you think we're doing all these surveys and asking these questions and people are giving us their honest answer? Or do you think we're all still in a phase of being very guarded and we don't want to raise any flags because we don't want to be the one that's seen as a problem or one that could be, heaven forbid, let go if things get tough economically with a company?
I think there's two things I've seen with regards to surveying employees. Number one is I've seen many companies that are not surveying employees and not asking for their opinion. And I think this is an oversight. And so asking employees what makes them more productive, what do they need to be productive, is very important. And you don't have to, we've done some surveys that are just more general statistics. They're not narrowing into one. And if you're an individual and you have a specific circumstance, by all means, talk to your manager. But the first thing is actually surveying your employees. And often for those organizations that do survey, they're surprised because they think that they know what the employees need and they always tell them something that surprises them. So ask your employees what they need to be productive, because as you know, productivity is a highly personal thing. It's very individual. If you're introvert, if you're extrovert, depending on your home situation, what point you are in your career. But ask employees what they need. That's number one. And I would say that we are starting to evolve what employees need. So it's not an all or nothing. Some people are delighted to work remotely. Some people can't wait to get back to the office because their home environment isn't conducive to that. I think we have to serve all demographics of employees, but it starts by asking them. And I do see employees when they do respond to the surveys being honest, Mike. And it's really one of the interviews I'm doing is from an HR professional to talk about how employee benefits and the type of benefits that are offered. It's shifting from amenities to virtual and things that allow people to collect a little bit differently, whether that be, you know, a subsidization for a home gym instead of going to the gym at the office, if that's an amenity, or some sort of fitness subsidization. And we're seeing more, you know, gamification things come up like Fitbit clubs and things like that. So people can remain connected at some virtual level, um, but productivity overall is very personal. So if you haven't surveyed your employee base, I think it's a really important step to understanding.
Yeah, that is the key takeaway that you just added to my thinking, because I'm glad you said that, Lorri. I love that. How do we define productivity is the question I'm going to ask. And I think that that's where my problem is. We see these surveys go out and people say in the survey, how productive are you? Or how is your productivity level compared to pre-pandemic times? And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, there was a big software company where the chief people officer did just that. They sent out a survey. We're trying to get a gauge of how productive everyone was being during the pandemic. And 93% came back and said, I am just as productive or more productive than before the pandemic. And I was like, my first reaction was, wow, that's amazing. Then I said, wait a minute, I can't believe that's true. I think they're holding back. They're not telling the real story. But now with your added level of productivity means different things to different people, and how we each define it personally is so variable that without that more detailed description of what we're really looking for, I don't think people, maybe they don't deliberately not tell the truth, but I don't think people are telling the whole story. And I can see a people officer or an executive saying 93% of our people are just as productive as before, or even more productive. Why ever go back to the office? Or let's completely make some changes based on that. But the long-term sustainability of this remote work alone, even if those results are coming in now, I don't think that is a wise move, because I think there's multiple layers, as you just indicated, with our personalities and what we need. And there needs to be more inquiry about how are you really doing? Because for me, again, I'll just speak for myself. That's the one thing, one person I know best is me. I was always a remote worker, as I said, and I was actually probably as productive or more productive, if you want to talk about output, you know, the amount of work I was doing, the amount of podcasts I was creating, the amount of calls I was on, interviews I was doing, absolutely more productive volume wise in those first couple months. But as far as the sustainability of that workload and the fact that I was missing out on those times of travel where I was on a plane by myself, listening to a podcast that someone else had done, just consuming some information, or just even relaxing and listening to music and watching movies and TV shows. You know how much I love to just kind of escape from reality, even in my old life on a plane or in a hotel room. I found myself missing out on all those downtime, which was something that I needed to recharge my battery and be a better person in the long run. Do you find that to be true? Is this required a lot of adjustment on your part?
I think what you said is so astute. In fact, productivity or the lack of productivity, I don't think has been the issue for the most part. In fact, I think people have become workaholics because of a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, they're not commuting, so they're saving a couple hours a day probably, and they're using that time to work. They're also quite worried with furloughs and things like that of being visible and present.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actually going over and above what they would normally do to be visible and included and available. And it's made the home life very borderless from work. So I actually see people working longer hours and harder so that they're not perceived to be, you know, just, I don't know, doing laundry or
Agreed. Yeah.
on the garden.
Yeah.
They're working much, much harder. in fact, and that is taking a mental toll on people because they're not taking a break to go outside. And but I think I love your topic about productivity, and so I just want to go down a little bit more of this path and ask you some
Sure.
questions about this, Mike. So we're in North America, 63% of our economy now depends on knowledge workers, right? It's not like 100 years ago, we were very much a manufacturing and agrarian environment, and there were tangible outputs. So we knew how many uh, bricks an hour you would lay, or widgets you would manufacture on the assembly line. It was much more manufacturing, so we could measure productivity as some sort of an output by the physical or tangible. And we don't have that as readily available now because we're knowledge workers. So we haven't adjusted to that as well as we need to. So how do you measure the outputs of a knowledge worker? And I think that a lot of the time we've fallen on our laurels, like activity is productivity, or if I can see you in the office, then you're productive. But we all know activity is not productivity. Attending a meeting, it doesn't mean that you're productive. Just because I can see you sitting at your desk doesn't mean that you're not shopping for shoes or a new microphone on Amazon, right?
Right.
So we have to get much better as leaders in the workplace of measuring the outputs of knowledge workers. And part of that is it's a bit of a perfect storm in conflict with the way that we measure annual performance reviews. We set your annual objectives and then look at that once a year. It's really an anachronism with agile work and some of the more regular reporting. So I would say that the performance management structure is really broken, which is causing us to be suspicious of our employees' productive. I think most employees, and I'm generalizing here, but most employees that I've seen are way more productive because they're working way harder and longer hours. But I think employers or managers are asking the productivity question because they don't have a good way of measuring the output of knowledge workers, and they need to change that performance management structure to something that's much more agile.
And I'll even take it a step further. I agree with all you just said. And I'll say additionally that there's a real danger in that approach, because the fact that we're trying to measure output of a knowledge worker in the same way we would measure the output of a production line or assembly line worker is flawed from the beginning, because as we've already discussed, so many things that make me the person who can output 2 podcasts a week and 3 webinars and a live stream and all the things I'm doing every week, you can measure and check the box. Did Mike publish on Tuesday and Friday? And did he do that webinar he had scheduled? Yes, yes, yes. But what you can't see is that my energy level, my creativity, my willingness to explore new areas and come up with new ideas and come up with good questions, the quality of that output is really hard to measure, because it's part of the holistic view of me as a person, my health, my well-being, my mental state, but it's also the holistic view of my interaction with my colleagues and the culture of my organization, and how connected do I feel to the mission of my company, and do I really want to go above and beyond, creatively, and risk the potential downside of putting yourself out there creatively, because that's always the challenge. You know that, Lorri. Anytime you try to put yourself out there, there's a risk of being, criticized, or the idea being shot down or rejected. And I'll tell you what, if you don't have the energy to take that risk, those risks aren't happening. I got to believe that innovation and creativity and culture building, that those things that are less tangible, I don't say they're totally intangible. You can kind of see there are ways to measure those things in a broad picture. But I got to believe in these past 6 months that's suffered tremendously, way more than anybody's talking about right now. And that's the piece that I think will need to change, or will be something to watch in the future.
I totally agree. And it's interesting. I'm seeing organizations become much more progressive and evolving to exactly what you just said. And I'm seeing some what I view as retreating and doing things like measuring keystrokes that you've done per day, or the amount of hours that your computer was signed on to the network. And oh my God, that is not productivity. And I just, I can't even imagine why companies would sign on to that, because it's absolutely not a reflection. And humans are pretty clever. There's ways that you can game that too.
Always,
That's
always.
not a reflection of productivity. So I think it's going to force us out of necessity and culture and some of the anachronistic methods that we have today into a really progressive way of enabling productivity in the future in a very tailored customer customized way. I think that employee experience theme was really prevalent even prior to COVID, and I think it's only going to accelerate in the future.
Yeah, we were talking about this for years before the pandemic hit, and the idea that we needed to rethink how we approach our jobs, approach the employees. What does engagement really look like? How do you measure it? How do you build a culture? And how do you manage, right? How are managers being effective? Well, it was easier when everybody was in the office and you could say, I'm a good manager because all my employees are here today. And then that's what you're saying. In this new reality we're living in, or I'll say the current reality, there's going to be another new reality next month and next year. But in today's reality, I think a lot of managers are being revealed to be either poor managers or just maybe not equipped. I don't want to say that they're bad managers, but they're just not prepared. They haven't been trained to understand all these human factors and and have the empathy and have the skills to really find out what their employees need. And a lot of them are sitting back and waiting because the default, the easier thing to do is just kind of be reactive, let things play out, and then wait if there's a crisis or there's some kind of an issue that arises, I'll deal with it. But really what we need now is proactive, empathetic leadership, people who can really understand that, boy, if I'm struggling or if I'm dealing with family issues or mental health issues or stress and anxiety and fear about the virus and fear about returning to my office, if I'm feeling that, my employees are as well. And how can I help them? How can I put myself in their shoes? Because everybody's situation is different.
I love everything you said, Mike, and I think help is coming, by the way, this is actually forcing us to lead and manage differently, equip managers with different tools. I'm seeing a lot of new standards coming out around distributed workforces and teams and how to build better virtual teams, how to manage in a virtual environment. So I think where it was maybe in our subconscious or in our subtext before, the circumstances is promoting a much more sophisticated approach. So I think tools and help is coming. But I think the other thing that I think you said that was so thoughtful that I would just like to underline is all of us are human beings. We are a whole person. We are not just our work persona. And with the lines between home and work blurring, where the workplace is, we've had to be more accommodating of people that have to do homeschooling, of people that have taken their parents out of seniors' homes because they're worried about health risks and they're doing home care. Different, situations, different, getting to know people's personal lives. I mean, spouses or people singing happy birthday to 10-year-olds, or, my dog, I think, was a guest on your live cast.
Yes.
The lines are blurring a little bit, and our employees are not robots. Okay.
Right.
We're human beings. Everybody has different circumstances. And I think it's just become much more visible. We're acknowledging that, recognizing that, understanding it, and incorporating it. So if you have to do a homeschool, or if you have to get home to pick up your kid from school, or whatever your circumstances, there's so many people that have had to do that. So it's not a taboo thing anymore. It's,
Right.
okay, well, instead of booking the meeting at 4, I'll book it at 5, or a lot more flexibility and accommodation of that whole being a person. And a lot more tools that I think will allow us to do that. Like you mentioned Slack, and there's Teams and other tools that we have now that allow us to time shift a lot more of our discussion, have more casual conversations instead of emails, which tend to be fairly utilitarian. And I think we're evolving in that direction that is really going to serve us and bring that humanity into work.
I hope you're right. And I tend to agree, and I'm cautiously optimistic. In fact, I'll quote Simon Sinek and say, I am an optimist. I definitely see that light at the end of the tunnel. I know that eventually we will get past this virus. There'll be a vaccine. It won't go away fully, and we'll have some challenges getting people out of the mindset of is it 100% safe for me to return to offices or return to public settings or return to conferences? Well, no, it'll never be 100% safe. But before COVID-19 was something we knew about, the life wasn't 100% safe. So we have to do the safety dance as they did in the 80s, right? Men without hats, Lori. Ding, 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 data, ding, ding,
I
ding,
got to do
ding,
the
data,
robot when
ding.
you do that.
That's right. The safety dance. We have to do the safety dance, but it is a dance. And just to kind of put some of the positive, spin on things. And you don't have to be positive every day, folks. If you're optimistic, it means you do see the big picture and you know that in the end we will get through this. That's an optimistic attitude. But as Simon says, day to day, you could have a bad day. You could have a stressful day, an overlaid day. Your personal experience, like mine has been, will have those days where it's just not a good day. And it's okay not to be positive every day. And I get in front of a camera, I get in front of a microphone, I always tend to want to put on my happy face. But, Lori, it's not always sunshine and rainbows doing, our living a human life and a human existence. And I think that there's a silver lining. It's something you just said, that we have kind of humanized each other as far as workplace colleagues, where we usually put somebody in a box and saying that's, Bob from accounting or that's Sally from marketing. And we know them as they're just kind of robotic worker bee type personality. But this has forced us to get to know the human side, learn more about the family, the dog situations, things like that. And if there's a silver lining long term, I think we all will be better positioned to be empathetic and care for others and be patient. And also workers will have the ability to be flexible and have choice. I think this has freed them up in a lot of organizations. Now, I've always been, fortunate. I've had the luxury of working from home and having an organization, a culture that celebrates my entrepreneurial spirit working within a company. And that gives me the freedom and the ability to set my own schedule. It always has. But I know there's lots of folks out there in big companies today that haven't had that in the past, and maybe we'll have more of that in the future, which is nothing but a positive thing.
I love what you said, Mike. And, I think it's one of at least in our lifetime, that we've ever had a common enemy to rally around. And we're all faced in the same circumstances. And that in some level unites us and has allowed us to learn more about our colleagues on a different personal level that we wouldn't normally. And we've invited them into our homes, and you see families and our homes in many instances, or the books that we have on the bookshelf behind us, or the pictures and things like that,
or Baby Yoda, or my bobblehead Baby Yoda, which is something that makes me happy. And that if you know me, I'm a big Star Wars nerd. And if you can embrace that and join in with that with me, then we have this connection beyond what we do together in the workplace. So there he is, the child from The Mandalorian.
So there you go. Great. You heard it from Mike Petrusky. If you're having struggles at work, just use the force.
Exactly.
Just use the force. Yeah. Or I might try that. These aren't the deadlines that you're wondering.
Yes. Jedi mind tricks. You need to use some Jedi mind tricks in your work life. Absolutely.
But all kidding aside, Mike, I really think what you said is very thoughtful. And I personally have really struggled in the last 6 months because of the nature of my job, right? So I'm a senior vice president of strategy and innovation. And as we all know, collaboration is the fuel and fire for innovation. And it's been a real adjustment to try to do that in a virtual distributed environment. And a lot of those sparks happen from the casual conversations. So we've had to really change the way that we work and innovate and collaborate. And one of the things I worry about is really focusing on that in the future, because innovation is best done in person. And with more remote work, how can we keep that high performance culture that really is the fuel for innovation and how we evolve going forward? So that's always on my mind, and building in those, as we organize teams and that storming and forming stage before we're norming and performing, how do we actually have that environment? And we're much more utilitarian on video and emails. So that is on my mind, and that is something that I'm continuing to try to master on a daily basis. And it's been a challenge.
Are you a fan of Stephen Dubner and Freakonomics Radio and the book Freakonomics? Are you familiar with that at all?
I can't believe you're saying that. I'm actually re-listening to that book right now.
Okay, awesome. Well, he's got a podcast too. As a podcaster, you have to check it out. He does a great job, obviously, but he's got a second podcast with Angela Duckworth, who is a
Oh,
social psychologist who wrote the book Grit, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend. And they do a show called No Stupid Questions.
okay.
And it's just the two of them, and they chat, they ask each other questions, and they talk about from their experience and their social psychologist research and all the great wisdom they have. They apply it to these really interesting questions. And you just reminded me that there's no one size that fits all human beings. And we're in the workplace environment. We're trying to lead people. We're trying to get them to, be successful. Let's stop talking about being productive, but being healthy and happy and successful overall. We all need to have grit to get through this crisis. And that's why Angela Duckworth's input is so valuable to me. But do you know what the locus of control is? Do you have an internal or an external locus of control? I think I know the answer, but do you even know what that is? I learned it for the
No,
first
what
time by
is
listening
that?
to this podcast. So in social psychology, your locus, Locus, locus of control is, do you have an internal one where you feel that you have the control over many things in your life? Or do you have an external locus of control where you think mostly external factors are controlling your success or failure in your work, in your life, personally and professionally? So a quick test to determine which one you are is to say imagine you're in university or college or back in high school even, taking a test, and you take the test and you get the results back and you failed miserably. Is your first response to say, wow, I didn't study enough for that test. I really blew it. I shouldn't have been out partying last night. I should have been studying. I shouldn't have crammed for the test. You put it on yourself for the failure. Or do you say, that test wasn't fair? The professor's out to get me. The professor wrote the questions in a way that's confusing and deliberately tried to trip me up. So depending on how you react to that question, you will know whether you have an internal or an external locus of control. I know you enough personality wise that I assume you're an internal locus of control. You're like, Lorri, you need to try harder to do better on that test. And you know that you have control over things. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I thought you said locust at the beginning,
Right.
and I'm glad you weren't talking about
Yeah.
bugs.
We're not talking about
No, that's good, Mike.
grasshoppers that flying and attacking us. Absolutely not.
Definitely internal. And one of the benefits of growing up as a latchkey kid, you just learn these survival skills, and you realize you can't depend on anyone. And I don't mean that in a critical way. I mean, you learn
Yeah.
a sense of internal fortitude, and your figure it out ability, your problem solving is learned as an innate skill very early. And I definitely think mine's internal. What about you, Mike?
I'm the same way. And I was like thankful that I'm the same way because I feel like I'm more of a control freak than I need to be or can be, because you really can't control everything. You have to determine things you can and can't control. That's another conversation. But for those that maybe are dealing with an external locus of control, and that could be a very difficult position to be in. And the good news is, according to these social psychologists, is that we can get ourselves to become even more internally, locus of control, where we feel we have more power in our lives, especially in a world that is so out of control and overwhelming for us. So I would just leave that as a kind of an encouragement. And to kind of wrap it up, I found this quote from our favorite marketing guru, Seth Godin, recently. And I always try to quote Seth on my podcast and on my live stream because he just brings so much wisdom and understanding of the human side of what drives us. And here's a quote that kind of ties all this together for us. We could probably wrap up with this: flexible in the face of change, resilient in the face of confusion. All of these attributes are choices, not talents, and all of them are available to you. So even if you do feel like your default setting, the way you're naturally bent is to kind of have an external feeling of everybody else is in control and I'm not, you can move yourself. You are able to learn this skill of feeling more in control and getting a better handle on either your pandemic life or your career or how you need to upskill and move yourself forward. That's the great thing about being human, is that none of us are finished works. We have this opportunity to continue to grow, and we're going to have to. That's the big takeaway for me during this pandemic. And it's certainly something that I know is a challenge for all of us, but we're all in this together, and we just need to keep encouraging and inspiring each other to continue to move forward.
Mike
And B,
Petrusky. Oh, go
and
ahead.
B, and B, I need to say it because I didn't realize I was doing my tagline, but encourage and inspire each other to be a workplace innovator, right? Because that's what we want to do.
Absolutely. Mike Petrusky, in the words of Tragically Hip, you are ahead by a century.
Yes. And with an
Right?
E theme song. I love that song.
That's right. I had to think of a funny music reference, knowing you're going to be on the show. We would probably be singing at some point. But Mike, if people, I thank you so much for your wisdom today. And you're one of those people
Oh,
I always follow for trends. If people want to connect with you directly and follow your podcast, can you tell us how they could do that?
certainly. The easiest way, of course, is to go to workplaceinnovator.com. But I also would encourage you to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Mike Petrusky out there that I know. I know there's probably others, but look for me on LinkedIn. And if you're connected with Lorri, you'll connect with me very quickly because we follow each other and share each other's information all the time. But I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast, Lorri. And you know what? I'll sing for you. I'll end by saying, based on the Hamilton play, which is available now on Disney Plus for live streaming. If you haven't seen Hamilton, folks, it's an amazing, production and music and storytelling. It's fantastic, lyrics that kind of tell the story of Alexander Hamilton and the founding of the United States. But there's a song in there where Alexander Hamilton says, I'm not gonna, what does he say? I blew it. I'm not gonna miss my shot. No, I'm not gonna throw away my shot. I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. So there you go. Don't throw away your shot, folks. Take it easy, Lorri. I appreciate it very much.
Mike Petrusky, thank you so much. Amateur vocalist, member of the Corporate Real Estate Ginger Society, fellow Star Wars nerd,
Yes.
and all around thought leader and good guy. Thank you for being such an amazing guest. We'll see you on the other side.
See you later. Thanks.